Yes, hello, Tishlek, I'm Loten. Just few minutes ago, I did a live, but my friend Vijay Karanti called me, and so I had to stop because that's exactly what I wanted to do. Because Vijay Karanti, he posted something very, very important topic, and Hindustan Times, which is like one of the most important newspapers in India, posted or did an advertisement for the Chinese propaganda mouthpiece, which is called the China Watch. So all you need to know is China Watch. That's what Hindustan Times proudly like posted or made an article about this China Watch. And I think this is very, very dangerous because I just want to say that this exactly was done in the West in the last 15, 20 years. You know, if you go back and look into these major newspapers in the West, like Herald Tribune, you know, you can mention all the major newspapers in the West. They were literally bought by the Chinese government, and how they did is because they bought, you know, by money, they bought all these advertising columns, like not just a little page, but the whole advertising column. Like, for example, like sometimes it's like 10, 15, 20 pages of, for example, they talk about how wonderful Tibet is, how Chinese Communist Party has improved the lives of people there, and all that like bullshit lies were advertised. Tibet today is one of the themes they kind of really worked on to tell the world how wonderful the Chinese government is doing in Tibet and how Tibetans are enjoying under the Chinese government. All that kind of bullshit and lies. And the thing is that why I'm saying this is very dangerous is that it started like almost 25, 30 years ago. And, you know, if you do not believe in me, then go back in internet, go back in the, you know, like all the history of this publishing house, and you will see almost every week or at least every month they brought, the Chinese government bought the columns, you know, of especially the advertising columns where they you know, showered these newspapers. They must have given them millions, and they showered these newspapers with how wonderful Tibet is, how Tibetans are enjoying under, you know, Chinese propaganda and all this, you know, the Chinese Communist Party and all that kind of thing. So now, you know, I'm a traveler, I'm a musician. And as an artist, not only as an artist just singing, but I travel and I am kind of really meeting common people around the world, young men and women especially, and I ask them about Tibet. And I can assure you that today, 90% of the young people, they do not know anything about Tibet. And that is how effective Chinese propaganda machine is. Chinese are doing the best to buy all the newspapers through which, you know, by buying means like they don't pay money directly, but what they do is they buy these advertising columns, like which is like 10, 15 pages, like a whole issue where they talk about how wonderful the Chinese government is, how great the Tibetans in Tibet feel about the Chinese rule and all that kind of bullshit thing. And now just recently, Hindustan Times, which is one of the most important newspapers in India, like published an article or some kind of a column where it says all you need to know is China Watch. So that's how, again, you know, during the COVID time, what happened is that during the COVID time, the whole world felt the evil plan of China. And so suddenly, like, the Chinese government and the Chinese people, they felt like, oh, now the truth is out. So what shall we do? And then they became hesitant and they just kind of lowered their voice. But now again, it's starting, just like 20, 30 years back, when they started all these Chinese propaganda materials, when they started publishing and paying money in these publishers, like newspapers and all these things, by buying them through these columns, advertising columns, they were so effective. Literally, they annihilated, or they kind of shut down the voice of Tibet in the world, So this is so dangerous. Now, in India, they started this. And I just want to say, I want to thank Vijay Karant, who's an amazing guy. I mean, very simple guy who has poured all his heart for Tibet, came out on Facebook and he said, hey, take a look at this. This is dangerous, So I just want to say something. This is very, very important, because as an artist, as a traveler, I have, having seen all these advertisements and, the CCP propagandas in these, what we call the so-called the normal newspapers, these neutral newspapers in the West, who were completely bought by the Chinese propaganda machine, paying them millions probably to buy, to insert those advertisements about China's, greatness in Tibet and all that. Even now, I was just told that there was an article, or not even an article. I mean, it's not an opinion; it's a statement by the Chinese government through these advertising columns, that everybody in Xinjiang, they're happy under the Chinese government and all that kind of thing. Yes, it's kind of a way you might see it like, oh yeah, this is just a newspaper, so what, But this is so effective. I mean, the evil effectiveness of the Chinese government, this is so effective, this way, because they buy the advertising column pretending to be just, like any company or something like that, just letting out their information. And in the long run, people read this and then they say, oh yeah, it seems to be good. I meet many young people on the road, like in France, Germany, England. I mean, so many places, all over the world. And I talk to them and I say, hey, I'm Tibetan. What do you think about Tibet? And I can assure you that 99%, or let's say 90%, to be a little bit, how do you say? Yeah. This is tiring, because again, the Chinese government has started buying the advertising columns, and this is so effective because, as I said, last 15 to 20 years, if you go back, if you do not believe in me, go back and go back on internet and the history of all these newspapers, from Herald Tribune to Wall Street Journal to all these big, you will find at least in a month, at least, sometimes weeks, one after another, like the first part, second part, you will find Chinese propaganda materials sold through the newspapers, just like in any ordinary democratic countries. Like, it sounds very like, okay, very smooth and this and that, but that's how they did it. And now in India, they're doing this. And this is very dangerous. I think the Tibetan government, I should really inform the Tibetan government, and also the information of, the Kalun. We, from our part, we didn't do anything to contradict those things. I think, as far as I'm really my knowledge is concerned, I have never seen Tibetan buying these columns. Of course, they say we don't have that much money, and that's exactly. We cannot buy columns to talk about Tibet's truth. Whereas Chinese government, they have all the money and they buy And the most unfortunate thing is that these newspapers, the so-called, free press and world and, for peace and for truth and everything, especially who claim to be the truth, how do you say, the newspapers who, yeah, who write about the truth about the realities that's happening in Tibet or wherever, they publish these Chinese propaganda and materials and this and the that, so that in the last 15 to 20 years, I can assure you my life that if you go on the streets somewhere, you ask them, hey, do you know about Tibet? I bet you 90% of these kids, born between the last 15, 20, 30 years, they have no idea of Tibet. And what they know is only the Chinese propaganda, and that's how effective it is. From our part, Tibetan government has failed to contradict, to fight this Chinese propaganda, because we are not in a position financially to buy, these newspapers like the Chinese government. Only like when his son is not able to travel. He's 90 years old, and the Chinese government has done everything to block his journey, and now this is having such a great toll. Toll in the sense it's having a very, very unfortunately such an effect on our movement. His Holiness cannot travel now. And before, when he traveled, at least, when his Holiness came to Switzerland or anywhere, the newspapers, they had to talk about, this great man coming to their country, to their countries. But now, because his Holiness cannot travel anymore, so I would say our propaganda machine is just now, the voice of Tibet, which is like, recently there's this book called The Voice, this one, The Voice for the Voiceless, The Voice for the Voiceless, and this is exactly what it is. And His Holiness now cannot travel. And now the voice for the voiceless is cut off. And this is so dangerous. And I'm so thankful to Vijay Karanti. And I just want to tell you that me and Vijay Karanti, we will have this evening, by Indian evening standard time, somewhere around, I will let you know, me and Vijay Karanti, we will have a live kind of a talk on this. And I want to say this because, as I said, I met Vijay Karanti when I was a young man studying in St. Stephen's College. And I remember that I was instrumental in inviting His Holiness Dalai Lama to St. Stephen's College, because at that time, when I was studying in Delhi University in St. Stephen's, I used to, spread, pamphlets, and I used to show movies about Tibet, documentaries in the colleges, especially in St. Stephen's College where I was studying. So the Chinese government came to know, and the Chinese embassy came to know, that I am in the St. Stephen's College with my friend Denzit Taglala. So what they did is, when the Chinese ambassador was invited to a talk, they suddenly kind of how do you say, they abandoned the talk, because they said that there is a Tibetan there, and we cannot risk the life of our ambassador. So the talk was cancelled because of me kind of telling the truth about Tibet and spreading and pamphlets Tenzin Taglala, who is now His Holiness Dalai Lama's secretary, he will know this if you ask him. So His Holiness Dalai Lama, because the Chinese ambassador, he cancelled. At that time, the president was, was a Bihari guy who's now, Prashant. His name is Prashant. And Prashant is today number 2 in the World Bank. He's very high in the World Bank in Washington, D.C. So at that time, Prashant was the student's president, and Dr. Halla was the principal at the time. This was in 1986-7, between 1985 and 86-7. I was 3 years in St. Stephen's College. And when the Chinese ambassador cancelled his talk in the last minute, then I was sitting in one of the lawns, and Prashant came towards me and said, "This motherfucking Chinese ambassador, because of you, he cancelled the talk in the last minute. So can you invite Mr. Dalai Lama?" I said, firstly, it's not Mr. Dalai Lama, it's His Holiness Dalai Lama. And if you want to invite His Holiness Dalai Lama, well, there is a way, and not just like you invite him in a small room where, like the Chinese ambassador was invited. I said, if you want to invite, then you have to invite him through the college principal and in the main hall, because that's where His Holiness fits in. So the next day, Prashant and me, we wrote an invitation letter to His Holiness Dalai Lama and sent it through Tenzin Taglala. Now he's His Holiness Dalai Lama's secretary, but at the time we were in the same college. So after 3 months, I received a letter from the Tibet office through Tenzin Taglala again, saying that His Holiness has accepted it. So His Holiness Dalai Lama came to St. Stephen's, and not only once, but 3 times. And the day when His Holiness came to St. Stephen's, it was one of the most memorable time, because, His Holiness came, the hall was packed, the main hall was packed, and then His Holiness talked about love and compassion. And then he gave an example of him when he was a little boy in Nobulinga. And like a little boy, he used to throw stones at the birds who came there, and then he would frighten them away. But then he said, "Look, my bodyguards, they are huge, and they look very ferocious, when you look at them. But because of their kindness, the birds, because they fed the birds, these birds would, sit on the hands of these ferocious-looking bodyguards. We call them Singa. And when this little boy, His Holiness, came, these birds, they used to fly away out of frightening. So His Holiness talked about, no matter how big or small you are, but the compassion, the power of compassion. He was giving the example of these bodyguards, although they look ferocious, but they were so kind-hearted monks. I mean, amazing, So His Holiness talked about this compassion, and I think, as I was told and as I looked through, this is the first time ever His Holiness came. That was in 1980. Imagine 1985, 86, 87, when I was in college. So it was the first time ever His Holiness came to an Indian institution and spoke, there. So I'm so blessed, and I feel that I did a wonderful thing, because actually I wanted to thank the Chinese embassy, because it was because of the Chinese embassy, because of their their suspicion, and because of the fact that they are so misplaced on this planet, suspicion, evilness, lies, and all these dirty things in their mind. Because of them, they gave us a chance that His Holiness Dalai Lama came. Because without this incident, that, because I was spreading propaganda, not propaganda, I mean, from our part, they would say, oh, the Tibetans, this Tibetan boy is propagating, this and that, the Chinese government would say that. But I was actually, because when I came to college in St. Stephen's, like very few people knew about Tibet. Maybe one or two smart guys knew about Tibet, but the rest, they had no idea of Tibet. And St. Stephen's is one of the most prestigious, important colleges in India because 40% of the, it's St. Stephen's and Hindu college. These are the two most important colleges in India where like 40% of the Indian civil service people, they kind of land in St. Stephen's. From St. Stephen's, they become IS officers and all these big, people in Indian government. So I thought, wow, how come they don't know anything about Tibet? They have not been educated about Tibet. So what I did is I said to myself, these people in 30 years, 20 years, in 20, 30 years, or not even in 20, 30 years, in couple of years, they're going to be one of the most important Indians who are going to rule India, in the civil servant and as ministers and this and that, So, I should educate them on Tibet. And that's where I started, when I was shocked that Indians at the time knew nothing about Tibet, I was so shocked. And then I started, spreading pamphlets. And I even showed his one, there is a amazing documentary on Tibet by BBC, which is called History of Tibet, Volume 1, 2, and 3. When I went back to Dharamsala, I went to the Tibetan Government Information Office. At the time, Sampela, who unfortunately died, but Sampela was, I think, secretary there. So I spoke with Sampela, and because Sampela was also an ex-TC St. Stephen's, so the Tibetan Information Office, they were very kind, and they gave me lots of materials, and then I put it everywhere. And the thing is that the Chinese government, from that time, you can see that how Chinese are very active. They're very kind of looking everywhere who are the culprits against them. So they came to know that there is a young man called Loten Namling. That time I was called Lobsang Tenzin. So they kind of, last minute, they ditched the students' union in St. Stephen's, and they said they are not going to come. So because of that, because they cancelled his talk, thanks to the Chinese, it's always like this. Sometimes, ironically, I have to thank the Chinese government because that's like, there are some cases where, instances where, Chinese government gave us a lot of opportunities. But on the other hand, of course, such things as now the China Watch, this is very, very dangerous. And in the last 15, 20 years, since the whole Western, not just the government, but in the West, people got crazy about, doing business with China without even thinking, how dangerous, how kind of evilly the Chinese propaganda machine is working, So now, if you go, you can test it. There are Tibetans who are living in Switzerland. Go and test. Go and ask a young Westerner, do you know anything about Tibet? Maybe now, because they may hear something about His Holiness Dalai Lama, maybe they will say, oh, that Dalai Lama, or this and that. But apart from that, if you go a little bit deeper into the history of Tibet, why Tibet was annexed by the Chinese government, why Tibetans are still suffering under China, all these things, they will just know nothing. 99% of them, they will know nothing about Tibet. And that's how unfortunately, how Chinese propaganda machine is so effectively working, So this is, I want to thank again Vijay Karanti, and me and Vijay Karanti, we will have a talk about this. And I think these are issues that we really, on one hand looks very like not so like dangerous, but information is the most important thing in this present world. It's about information, and Chinese government is controlling since 30 years, 25 years at least, controlling information on Tibet, the false information. And that's where we are not able to rise up, because the false information on Tibet is so powerful, what the Chinese propaganda, that people slowly, they give up. They say, yeah. It doesn't happen overnight. It happened in the last 20, 30 years. And now, after 20, 30 years, when they started this propaganda, buying newspapers, today, just see the result. And that's what is happening now in India, in Hindustan Times, which is one of the most important newspapers in India. There, the newspaper, the editors, they must have got, lakhs and lakhs of rupees or thousands of dollars. So, they bought it. And then, look at the way, you can go on my Facebook later, you can see, all you need to know is China Watch. That's it. From our side, Tibetan government, sometimes I'm sorry, I love my government, and I'm one of the fiercest fighter for the Tibetan government, I fight for the very existence of Tibetan government, how important it is. I fight with Tibetans, of course I fight with Chinese to maintain how important, the importance of Tibetan government, the exiled government. But on the other hand, our leaders, sometimes, unfortunately, they are living in the comfort zone, doing what they can. And when it needs a little bit of more, like a step further to make it more effective, then, if this is not so interesting for their life, or it hurts them privately, then they just immediately step back. And that's one of the reasons why we keep on losing. Although we have His Holiness Dalai Lama, one of the most, from the His Holiness Dalai Lama, so, from the soft power point of view, extremely powerful. But even then, he's unable to do anything, because firstly, because of the false propaganda, the evil money that China kind of puts in and buys all these so-called, the free speech outlets like newspapers. But at the same time, we Tibetans are also kind of a little bit, laid back, and then we only, especially our leaders, they are like doing it just okay. They may seem a little bit like, wow, they're doing something, but how serious are they? So that's where I just want to say that my friend Vijay Karanti, I thank him because he's such a great guy, great friend of Tibet, and I will meet him soon, very soon in Mentawang, and hopefully we are going to have more discussions about this. But I just want to say that on my Facebook this evening, Indian Standard Time, somewhere in Indian, he will call me, and then we will do a live discussion to talk about it, what he has, read in this newspaper, because I live in Switzerland, so I don't know exactly what is written there, but I only saw, all you need to know is China Watch, and this is dangerous. Okay? See you this evening. Tashi Dalek.